December 2nd of 2021, the Isle made its 6th anniversary. Now that I think about it, it's kinda depressing, not gonna lie. And many dinosaurs came out throughout all these years, from big to small to used, and despite Evrima being the only branch in development, Legacy is still the predominant version of the Isle being played by the community. It's the default version when you install the game, and since there has been an influx of new players for the past few months, I decided to create the ultimate, the Isle tier list. Because, you know, that was never been done before. But before we start, I will clarify the rules and the criteria for my choices. First, this is a legacy only tier list, and I decided to include sandbox dinos as well, except PU and AIs. The reason for this is that most popular servers have an economy based on sandbox dinosaurs, being extremely common seeing Shans, Ankies and Acros everywhere. So even though they are locked on official, they are prevalent enough to be on this list. Second, no altern will be a factor, for two reasons. One, because even though altern is present on official servers, let's be honest, nobody plays there. The vast majority of the player base plays on community servers with rules, and a large portion doesn't have altern. So I will evaluate the dinosaurs the way they are actually played. And two, altern removes turn speed and turn radius from the combat equation. And since combat in Legacy Isle is already basic as it is, it adds an additional mechanic to be utilized during a fight. And third, all their stats will be used to evaluate their place on the list. This includes turn speed and radius, as well as their variants, attack speed, resistances, and so on. An exclusion to this will be the pack members. Community servers have different packs and herd sizes, so what might be viable on one server might be against the rules on another. So for simplification's sake, this list will consider these dinosaurs as individuals, ignoring packs and herds entirely. Keep in mind that even though I'm trying to be as objective and impartial as possible, I'm a person, and therefore bias will be present. However, I will try my best to rate them fairly. Besides this, it's just a tier list. We are here to have fun. If you like a certain dinosaur that it's at the bottom of the list, don't bother with it. You're not making a bad choice. This is a social game. Fun and social interaction is the core of the experience. So at the end of the day, just play what you like. Alright. Now with this out of the way, let's begin. Starting at the absolute bottom, for no one's surprise, lands Herrera and Astro. Extremely fast and nimble should give them a big advantage against the roster, but their pathetic damage and bleed makes them unable to kill anything that is not a juvie or someone AFK. And killing juvies is not too big of an achievement since literally anyone can do it anyway. Their agility would put them much higher on the list. However, since they are carnivores and require meat to survive, hunting is a part of their gameplay, and being unable to kill stuff doesn't help their case too much. They are so bad in fact that this tier is exclusive for them. They are good pets though. Climbing now to the F tier. This is for dinosaurs that are near unplayable when it comes to combat, but unlike our small scavs, they are able to kill stuff, just not reliably so. First one is the Parasaurolophus. Being the tankiest mid tier, including carnivores, alternative attacks, good speed for their size, and a ginormous stamina pool should, in theory, make Paras a pretty decent dinosaur. However, beneath the surface there are major issues that put them this low on the list. Their stamina pool is extremely large, but it also has an atrocious regen, by far the worst regeneration in the entire roster. In addition, their turn speeds across the board are excruciatingly slow, being very easy to tail ride them even as an elo. But even if Paras didn't have these disadvantages to begin with, there's a bigger problem that completely ruins this dinosaur. You see, in Legacy's current patch, Paras' headbutt hitbox is completely broken, being unable to register any damage below their heads, which so happens to be above all dinosaurs, excluding apexes. The end result is Paras being unable to deal damage to any dinosaur shorter than them, which is the vast majority of the roster. Next one is Camarasaurus. Despite being a massive sauropod, it only has 200 more HP than a Shant, and Shants outmatch Camas in every single way. They are faster, hit harder, turn faster and sharper, and most importantly, they require way less food. For those who don't know, Camas, unlike other dinosaurs, absorb only 6% of food value per bush. This number is fixed, meaning regardless of bush size, they will always gain only 6%. While this is very cost effective when it comes to smaller bushes, it's a huge waste of food if they eat the bigger ones. This leads to camas being extremely undesirable to be on herds, being a literal food sink with very little value regarding protection. However, even in solo play, they are awfully outmatched. Their stomp is the most powerful single attack in the entire game, but its build-up animation is extremely long and leaves the dinosaurs stationary and unmovable for a long period of time, leaving it vulnerable to attacks. It's so bad that more experienced camas avoid stomping entirely, making a third of the dino's kit obsolete. Another major drawback is their extreme lack of bleed resistance. And guess which carnivore deals bleed damage? Yeah, all of them. Obviously, the majority of carnivores won't consider attacking a cama in the first place, but remember, this is about the dinosaurs, not the players. Allos, Utahs, Dilos, Sucos, Gigas, Spinos, Rexes, Carnos, and Berries have enough bleed damage to maximize Cama's bleed in a considerable short amount of bites. Especially Spinos, they just don't give a fuck. Lastly, on this tier, everyone's favorite herd pet, the Pachycephalosaurus. Being nerfed to the ground, Pachy is just an inferior Maya on every single regard. And on top of that, it takes even longer to grow. Even though they have enough DPS and speed to tail-ride Allos and Sucos, their very low HP and awful bleed resistance makes them extremely vulnerable to any sort of attacks. Pachy's are glass cannons, but without the cannons, and sadly it will be placed in F tier. In D tier reside the Ankylosaurus. Even with their massive tankiness and the highest basic attacks in the game, Ankies lack a lot of features to make them viable creatures. Their insane damage makes them extremely dangerous, but their heavy lack of mobility in both speed and turn radius makes them almost a stationary target, and having low bleed resistance compared to their HP only emphasizes their vulnerabilities. Not to mention their impotence against apex predators. Rexes outtank them, Gigas require only 2 bites to maximize its bleed, and again, the Spinos just don't give a fuck. Another very similar dinosaur to Anky that it's also in this tier is Stegosaurus. Despite being lighter than Ankies, Stego's decent speed, very good turn radius, being one of the very few herbivore bleeders, the third best bleeder in the game in fact, makes them straight up superior to Ankies. However, both suffer the same issue. Since both deal a lot of damage, small and mid-tier carnivores very rarely oppose any threats to them, being apexes, their main predator. And as established with Anky, the 3 apex carnivores absolutely demolish both Anky and Stego. Although the latter has a better chance in a 1v1 scenario, especially against Gigas, these 2 herbivores are way too outmatched for their quote-unquote natural predators to be considered as good dinos, and therefore they will stay here. Next one, on its own in C tier stands the Carnotaurus. Being the fastest dinosaur in the game disregarding ambush, Carnos are all about speed and bleed. Their insane speed, however, is counterbalanced with the absolute worst turn radius in the entire game. More experienced Carnos utilize Z-turn to turn sharper, but this cancels their momentum, since Carnos, unlike other predators, don't have ambush but rather an acceleration mechanic. Stopping kills this momentum, giving their opponents the opening to catch up. Their decent bleed but mediocre bite force makes them rely a lot more on bleed, and their considerably low HP makes them more vulnerable to a more prolonged confrontation. Carnos are very fast, but also very average. And that's what C tier is, average. They are not good, but also not bad. Carnos, not good, but not bad. Seal of approval. Now on a slightly better position on the next tier is the Allosaurus. Notorious for being unbalanced, broken, and toxic amongst the community, Allos currently stand above average. Their surprisingly fast ambush speed, very good bleed, solid bite force, and having the absolute best HP heal in the entire game alongside one of the best bleed heals, makes them a formidable opponent worthy of their title. However, what makes them not being higher on the list is their poor turn radius and drag. You see, unlike the majority of dinosaurs that stop on the spot, Allos will slide and drag themselves for a few extra steps before stopping completely. This, in consequence, makes the act of tail riding and brake checking a lot harder to perform. There is a way to circumvent this by combining Z-turn with other keys and whatnot, and even though it is feasible, it is too high of a skill ceiling for the average player, especially regarding something that other dinosaurs do automatically, and that's why Allos is at the bottom of B tier. Acrocanthosaurus is the next on the list. There's not too much about it. It's just a superior allo in most aspects. Higher damage, higher bleed, tankier, faster, slightly better turn radius, slightly. Acros are allos with gigantism. However, the devs must have forgotten to turn healing on for the Acro because its HP healing is by far the worst in the entire game. It takes literal hours from 4th screen to full without counting bleed. For some, that alone is enough to consider Acros inferior to Allos, but looking at the stats, it's more of a trade-off point of view. Versatility and sustainability as the Allo, or sacrifice regeneration for a big boost in stats as the Acro. It can be seen as personal choice, but seeing Acro's stats so above and beyond Allos, I considered it as a stronger choice. Moving for a diet change comes the Maiasaurus. Being near the top when it comes to speed, very tanky for how fast they can run, Maias are racing trucks with legendary bleed resistance and bleed heal, having the best of the latter in the game. They ignore bleed like a kid ignores homework, they are scary in the right hands. Small predators are no match for them, they can face tank Carnos with ease, even defeating Allos if skilled enough. Their only downfall is their low DPS. Not having much damage to begin with, their low attack speed makes them appear weaker than they really are. However, it's impossible to deny that they lack on the offensive department, relying only on their speed and tankiness to win against the predators they can face, while being fast enough to avoid the ones they can't. And now to blow these three out of the water comes the Albertosaurus. Mini Rexes with very high bite force, fast attack speed and an extraordinary ambush speed, surpassing Maias even. Albertos are rarely seen and usually underrated. Despite their turn radius not being the best and having poor stamina regen, these carnivores obliterate anything they can sink their teeth into. Not relying on their very low bleed damage, Albertos focus on pure strength alone and become extremely deadly on skillful hands. And even though Acros are significantly tankier, Alberto's superior turn radius is a major advantage that ends up being the definitive factor of their superiority, putting them at the top of B tier. We now enter into A tier, ever so closer to the top, and at the bottom lies Baryonyx. With surprisingly fast ambush, very tight turn radius, and fast attack speed, skilled berries can toy with apexes all day. Highly underrated by the community, Berry's tail riding capabilities are exceptional, and despite not being stronger than most carnivores, their agility is superior than most, including Dilophosaurus. The only thing keeping them lower is ironically their size. Being significantly taller than all small carnivores comes with the drawback of having a larger hitbox, and as a consequence, berries are much more susceptible to being hit in comparison to other fast predators. And speaking of the Dilophosaurus, he's the next on the list. The evil Batman of the Isle known as the Terrors of the Night. Despite their very low HP, Dilo's insane bleed and high attack speed more than compensate for it. Their extremely sharp turn radius and decent fast ambush makes them a nimble opponent, and in conjunction with the best night vision in the game, they become highly deadly during the night. However, their biggest strength is also their main weakness. During daytime, their power is heavily weakened, since night vision is their strongest weapon. Knowledge is power, and in the dark, Dilo's superior vision gives them a permanent advantage, only emphasized by their reliance on bleed, which they have plenty of. But even during daylight, skilled dinos are devastating, easily bleeding out most dinosaurs and being absolute banes to apex predators. Next on the list comes the Suchomimus, the meat-eater juggernauts. These semi-aquatic fellas deal a punch and a half with their crushing bite force, dealing the highest damage per bite of any carnivore that is not an apex. Not only that, his bleed is very above average, and with very high HP values on top, Suchos demolish everything in a 1v1 scenario. Their turn radius is decent, however his major drawback is his annoyingly slow movement speed. Their walk especially is extremely slow, making them vulnerable to larger predators where their high HP is not as useful as it should be. Even with a very fast ambush, their lack of maneuverability outside of it is the main factor that places them only in A tier. And now for the most underrated dinosaur in the entire game, the Ceratosaurus. Yeah, you didn't see that one coming now, did you? Their excruciatingly low HP and average speed often depicts them as inferior dinos or just straight up bad. In reality though, they are a high skill ceiling monster with absolutely devastating damage if the player knows what they are doing. Having a very high bite force for their size, having the second best stun radius in the game, and one of the fastest attack speed dinos to boot, Ceratos can deal insane amounts of damage to a prepared opponent, and with the support of their amazing turn, they are able to tailride almost everything with ease. Despite having terrible bleed, Ceros don't need it. Their tactic of obliterating everything with a barrage of bites is already highly efficient, being their lack of bleed more of a balance aspect rather than a detriment. Ceratos are definitely a fearsome opponent, commonly disregarded by many. Going back to the herbivores comes Triceratops. And yes, this is the worst apex in the game. Their apex level stats should place them at the top by default, with their AK plus HP and weight, high bleed, high attack speed, and a secondary stomp attack. Triceratopses are still a dangerous opponent to face in combat. However, Trikes have so many flaws and shortcomings that I couldn't, in good faith, place them any higher. Their maneuverability is almost non-existent, with terrible turn and slow movement speed. They even possess the acceleration mechanic that Carnos have, but their max velocity is so low that this mechanic makes them actually slower and clankier to move, with no advantage whatsoever. Their stomp attacks share the same issue as Camas. The animation takes so long periods of time to finalize, leaving the dinosaur vulnerable to be flanked or avoided. And unlike Camas, the damage of the stomp itself is not much greater to compensate, essentially making half the dinosaur's kit extremely situational at best and useless at worst. And currently their hitboxes are just as inconsistent as before, but reversed. Previously their attacks could reach inexplicable places, which was broken, but at least was broken in the Trike's favor. Now their attacks are constantly deflected, being very common missing attacks. Some smaller predators can effectively hunt them down already, which is already bad enough, but what truly brings them down is how poorly they perform against dinosaurs of their own category. Gigas outbleed them, Rexes outtank them, which is ridiculous when we remember that Rexes have less HP than Trikes, and, well, once again, the Spinos just don't give a fuck. It is sad to see a beloved herbivore in such a terrible state, but until things change, Trikes will remain in A tier. And finally, at the top of A tier comes Therizinosaurus. These long necks are ancient in the game's history, however they are still excellent in combat. Theris are the antithesis of Trikes, with very low HP for their size, but absolute ludicrous speed and damage. The turn might be average, but their speed surpasses whatever detriment the turn might cause. But there are three aspects that puts them at the very end of A tier, but not higher. Despite their speed, their massive size and surprisingly low HP makes them vulnerable to any sort of attacks. placing them in the category of glass cannons, and in Theory's case, it is a very delicate glass cannon. Having one of the worst bleed resistance amongst the roster, if they get hit, it becomes a race against the clock until the bleed does its job. And even when the danger is dead and the Theories become victorious, they are still in fatal danger. Not only their resistances are bad, their bleed heal is horrendous, being the dinosaur that most commonly dies of dehydration or starvation after a fight. The third reason is, ironically, their damage. Let me explain. Theories have a unique form of attack. On most dinosaurs, basic attacks deal 1 tick of damage and stomps usually deal 3 or 4. For Theories, their main basic attack shows the dinosaur performing 3 arm swings, which makes us believe Theories deal 3 ticks per attack, right? No. In reality, each attack animation can deal between 3 and 9 ticks of damage. The problem with this is that the number of attacks is completely random, meaning that you can be super lucky and insta-kill a Rex on a single attack, or be super unfortunate and deal pathetic damage during the entire fight. Obviously, the average amount of damage Theory players experience is usually high, but their vulnerability to damage, and especially bleed, alongside their inconsistent damage output, grants them the top of A tier. We reach at last S tier, the top dinosaurs in the aisle. And the first one to be on this list is the Dinosaur. This little borrower was not built for combat, but what they can do it extremely well. Minuscule in size, very high speed, turn, and exclusive ability to burrow, this dinosaur is a master of evasion. Dryos don't need to fight, because they can flee from everyone with ease, even Carnos despite them being faster. It's a simple, solid herbivore at the bottom of S tier. And right next to them comes the Gallimimus. Not much to say here, Gallies are just straight up superior Dryos. Yeah, that's it. Moving on to the second apex so far is the Giganotosaurus. The King of Bleed reigns supreme with the highest bleed damage of any dinosaur in the game. This powerful theropod can deal devastating amounts of damage in both short and long term. An extensive ambush time, decent speed for its size, high HP pool, and one of the fastest trots in the game, Gigas can easily outpace almost everyone and outmatch most dinosaurs with ease. Despite requiring a slightly higher skill level in comparison to other apexes on the roster, Gigas are still an excellent powerful dinosaur that is feared by many. Next one is Diabloceratops, an apex in disguise. Dibbles surpassed every mid-tier in the game and impose a major threat to most apex predators. While the average Diablo player might not be as intimidating or dangerous, a skilled or experienced one is an absolute monster. High HP for mid-tier, smaller than most dinosaurs in that category, which helps them evade attacks more easily. Excellent turn radius, able to ride almost anything. High bleed damage, fast for a mid-tier, the absolute best stamina regen in the game, amazing bleed resistance and heal, hard hitter, this demon has it all. They are so good in fact, that I personally would consider them overpowered if, these guys didn't exist. Their only drawback is their very high food maintenance. Getting hungry every 10 minutes is annoying as hell, but since they are herbivores, this is not as significant enough to be an actual detriment. For those who are not aware, yes, this is my favorite Isle dinosaur and my main in-game. Dibble is by far what I play the most, and what I used on almost every video I made on the game so far. But despite my obvious personal bias to this fella, my judgment is not. In fact, if you check my early videos, you will see that my description of this demon lizard is an understatement. But unfortunately, Dibble is not the strongest dinosaur. There are a few more dinos left that are above it, being the next one the bane of his existence. the Spinosaurus. The only dinosaur Diablos can tail ride, this carnivore behemoth doesn't have much to worry about. With a ridiculous amount of 9000 HP, high attack speed, good bleed, and extremely sharp turn radius makes them a terrifying opponent to basically all dinosaurs in the game. Their turn is so good that can dodge attacks more easily than most, but very often they can just simply tank it anyway with their insane health pool. They are also quite fast. Climbing higher and higher to the top of the list, we have the Shantungosaurus. This hadrosaur is a wall of meat, weighing practically as much as a Kama, faster than all apex predators ignoring ambush, and possessing the scariest move in the entire roster, the Shan Stomp, an attack so strong it can one-shot almost anything. It can easily turn the tide of the battle on a single second. The difference between the good and the bad Shan is how and when they stomp, being a precious resource since each attack consumes a large portion of the dino's stamina. Their insane stats are so outlandish that most dinosaurs, including apexes, prefer avoiding them at all costs than to hunt a single specimen. Although not unkillable, fighting one of these grass-eating titans is a gamble between a hefty meal and instant death. And finally, at the top, the strongest dinosaur in the entire game. The most powerful, the most cunning and vicious dinosaur ever released in this forsaken game is the No. It's not. It's the Utahraptor. This small carnivore has the highest skill ceiling out of every other dinosaur. Possessing the best turn in the game, Utahs can tail ride everything. And I do mean everything. Rexes, Trikes, Shants, Spinos, and even Ankies. With enough skill, Utah players are able to kill everything. Their stats don't matter at all. Their flexible jump, their light fast ambush speed, and their amazing turn give Utah players the tools needed to outskill every other dinosaur. Their low HP and DPS matters none with the insane agility these scaly birds possess. Sticky Utah's YouTube channel is proof of how powerful Utahs can truly be and how skill reliant this dinosaur is. There you go. The winner and the top of S tier dinosaur in the aisle goes to Utahraptor. But wait, you guys might have noticed something. There's something missing. There's dinosaur missing. That's because there's an extra tier, you fools, and it's exclusive for the T-Rex. This guy is so incredibly overpowered that it's not even a joke. This 65 million year old chicken can kill everything. Camas? Sorted. Spinopair? You got it. Shants? Is this even a joke? They one-shot half the roster with their overpowered, absolutely unbalanced bite force. He's the 5th tankiest dinosaur in general. His ambush makes him faster than 80% of the roster, and his exclusive bone break mechanic flips the game's balance table and breaks it in half. Rexes dominate everything. You think you see Rexes everywhere because people think they are cool? No, fuck you, Gigas are cooler. It's because this monstrosity is so utterly unbalanced that it would be a complete idiocy not to pick them. The only saving grace on community servers is the fact that all turn is off. Fights are so in Rex's favor by default that it drew a portion of the communities away from the game entirely just by the fact Rexes are in this broken state. And that's what this tier is. Broken. Rexes aren't even good, they are unbalanced masses. I dedicated an entire video talking about this bastard, please go and watch it, and I still stand by it. So there you go. Here's my tier list. Now go play Evrima.